you're interested in mankind, if you're interested in society and how it should function, then you would do well to study the past.
There are certain moments in history where the human spirit just kind of bubbles up and goes.
Whether we're talking about democracy, art, philosophy, it doesn't really matter what the subject is. It begins in Greece.
The school acts as a gateway to not just a different place, but sometimes a different time.
We bring Greece's past to life to really help shape the world's tomorrow. Preserving, protecting, promoting all aspects of Hellenism from ancient times till today. And we've been doing it for 135 years.
There were educated businessmen, lawyers, financiers who truly believed that the study of the Greek past was of a great good for the general public and that it needed to be advanced. We exist by virtue of the philanthropic efforts of individuals like them. We had pioneer women archaeologists leading research teams in Greece. We are international, multicultural, and intercontinental in terms of the networks of collaborations that are carried out.
We're a consortium of almost 200 leading academic institutions in the United States, all of whom support the school.
We draw from that membership, whether in Texas or Hawaii or Massachusetts or Florida, to bring people here.
In a place that has 3 world-class libraries within 100 meters. When you're in Athens, it feels like the center of the universe.
I would rather do this here in Athens than anywhere else because the major monuments are here and it's very inspiring.
You feel what a contemporary Greek would have felt standing on the Acropolis with the Parthenon right next to you.
What you're doing is creating the next generation. They're all going to be high school teachers, they're going to be professors, they're going to be scholars, and they are the ones who are going to pass on our understanding of antiquity. We have the pieces that were necessary for the working of the democracy, and those are the people of Athens speaking to you directly over thousands of years.
We have about 1.5 million items digitized.
All of that information can really be disseminated to new audiences, to the global classroom.
The American School gives you a place where you can kind of explore your own passions in a way. You have people who are so passionate about the material, they create tools to study it. When you see what can be done at a single site, then you realize, well, why can't we do this across all of Greece and have all of Greece accessible in that way?
There's hardly a part of Greece that some American school project is not operated in.
We've got 300,000 catalogued objects to educate our students, but also for research so that we can come up with better interpretations. We're also developing ways to present this all to the public. So we're creating a management plan to create an archaeological and ecological park, educational programs for children in the States, which we translate into Greek so that students in Greece can also use those same materials.
The collection is about the history of Greek genius through the ages. It is very important to find ways in which to attract people, to make them understand that there is value in the old books and secrets that are hidden in there.
Our mission is essentially a rescue mission. We're creating time capsules for future generations.
It is important to be able to share this through exhibitions, scholarly presentations.
We carry out many synergasias, collaborative projects with archaeologists in the different inspectorates of the Ministry of Culture. We conduct research together and publish together.
We're at a moment of revolutionary change in archaeological science.
Using sophisticated techniques, we dig deep into the past.
We can now tell not only what a person had in his last meal, but where he lived.
I guess I've always been pretty interested in different things, but the school gives you the opportunity to really explore all of those things.
You come over as an American and you leave feeling much more like a Greek. You really do get a second home. Το δεύτερο σπίτι.
His Excellency, the President of the Hellenic Republic, will be here soon. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Your Excellency, President of the Hellenic Republic, dear guests from the Gennadius Library and the American School of Classical Studies at Athens. My name is Bona Westcott, and I am the director of the American School of Classical Studies at Athens. I welcome you to this symposium for the Gennadius Library.
Georgopoulou, and to the head librarian, Irini Solomonidi, for organizing this symposium, and to all of its participants. I now turn to Andreas Zombanakis, Chair of the Board of Overseers of the Gennadius Library, to speak on their behalf.
Εξοχότατε κύριε Πρόεδρε της
Your
Ελληνικής
Excellency,
Δημοκρατίας,
President of the Hellenic
εκλεκτοί
Republic,
προς...
esteemed guests, members and friends of the American School of Classical Studies at Athens, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor and privilege to welcome you tonight with this conference for the 100 years of Gennadius Library. Your Excellency, your presence here makes this event even more important, and thank you very much for the honor to this celebration.
And we're deeply grateful for the honor you bestow upon this institution. When Ioannis and Florence Gennadios made their gift of 26,000 rare books and manuscripts to the American School of Classical Studies in 1922, they expressed what they called their confident hope that the American school might become, and I quote, a world center for the study of Greek history, literature, and art, ancient, Byzantine, and modern. That phrase has guided the Gennadius Library for a century. It is in many ways our lodestar. What is striking about this vision is not only its ambition, but its breadth. Gennadius understood Hellenism not as something confined to antiquity, nor even to geography, but as a continuum, historical, cultural, and intellectual, extending across time and across borders. And he also understood something more subtle but fundamental, that a private act of collecting acquires its true meaning only when it enters into a shared world of scholarship. The impact of their gift extended far beyond the creation of a library. It also fundamentally altered the trajectory of the American School of Classical Studies at Athens. The school began as an institution primarily dedicated to the study of antiquity, training archaeologists and classicists. With the acceptance of the Gennadius gift, the American school expanded its scope, becoming over time a world center for the study of Hellenism in its full historical depth, from the earliest human presence in this land to the present day. The library has grown accordingly. From the original collection of 26,000 volumes, it's developed into a far richer and more complex body of material, shaped over decades by the generosity of donors, many of them American Philhellenes, whose commitment to the study of Greek history and identity has sustained and expanded Gennadius's original vision. It's the product of a single, highly personal act of collecting, and yet it is also the result of a century of sustained philanthropy and institutional stewardship. It is rooted in Greece, but has always been outward-looking, embedded in an international scholarly community and addressed as much to the world as it is to Greece. For 100 years, it has functioned not simply as a repository, but as a working library, a place where knowledge is not only preserved, but continuously produced. And this brings us to the question that frames our conference. We are living through a moment of profound transformation in the history of libraries. Digitization and artificial intelligence are changing fundamentally how knowledge is stored, accessed, and retrieved. Materials that were once accessible to only a handful of scholars can now be consulted globally. Information is more abundant and more immediate than ever before. The challenge we now face moves from access to knowledge, from accumulation of material to the creation of meaning. This is where institutions like the Gennadius Library have a vital role to play. In the first century of the Gennadius Library was about transforming a private collection into a public institution. The next century will be about transforming collections, physical and digital alike, into forms of public knowledge. Καθώς αναλογιζόμαστε έναν αιώνα που διαμορφώθηκε.
As we think of a century that was shaped by vision and scientific work, we remember that institutions like Gennadius Library are not just the gatekeepers of the past, but the medium through which the society understands itself and can imagine the future. For this reason, it is of high importance that this anniversary is honored by your presence. Your Excellency, the President, it's a great honor to invite you to speak to the audience. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, great nations are recognized not only by the strength of their institutions or the course of their history, but also by the way in which they preserve, honor, and highlight the evidence of their culture. The places that house the precious collections are places where a nation meets its deepest self. And they must be surrounded with the same security, diligence, and respect that every treasure deserves, because there is kept unsurmountable value, historical, national, and spiritual capital. It is no coincidence that Ioannis Gennadius, in an earlier dedication, mentions the reborn father, George Gennadius, as the one who passed on to his students, burning the candle, the torch of the intellectual and moral heritage of the ancestors, and took care to save the relics of their divine art. This formulation encapsulates an entire conception of education, culture, the duty of continuity of an uninterrupted course of the Greek spirit, a spirit that travels through the centuries, converses creatively with time, and passes from one generation to another, not only its heritage, but also its orientation towards the future. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here today to commemorate a century of uninterrupted operation, with the exception of a few years during the World War II, of one of the most important libraries in our country, the Gennadius Library, declaring the opening of the International Conference From Private Collections to Knowledge as a public good, the care of collections and the future of libraries. Treasury of books, archives, and works of art, valuable testimonies to the heritage of Hellenism from the end of antiquity to the present day. Gennadius is a foundation that goes beyond the functional role of a library and touches the core of our national cultural self-awareness. Of course, it all began with the valuable initiative of Ioannis Gennadius, a scholar, bibliophile, and diplomat, to donate in 1922 to the American School of Classical Studies 25 1,000 books, manuscripts, maps, engravings, and documents that narrate the long and fruitful course of the Greek spirit throughout time. Born in Athens in the mid-19th century, Gennadius had been shaped in an environment and a time during which modern Greek intelligentsia was attempting to consolidate its identity through classical education and the reception of European ideas and the newly established Greece. At the same time, was striving to build institutions and form spiritual self-awareness. A prominent spiritual figure that linked diplomacy and intellectual work with bibliophilia and cultural policy, author of important studies such as Judgments and Thoughts on the Letters of the late Koreus, or Lord Elgin and those before him throughout Greece and Athens, especially archaeological raiders, 1440 up to 1837, where he traces the capture of the Parthenon from its marbles. A fiery patriot and humanist cosmopolitan, Gennadius consolidated with his donation his crucial contribution to the history of collectivism, libraries and their institutions, embodying the model of a scholar citizen who, fully aware of the great importance of historical memory for the constitution of the nation, pledged himself to its preservation and continuity, and finally passing on to the next generations. Among the approximately 100 exhibits of Gennadius Library exhibition, we admire extremely rare publications such as the first grammar of Constantine Lascaris, printed in Milan in 1476, thus marking the beginning of the Greek printed tradition. The first edition of Lucian, printed in Florence in 1496 and edited by Gennadius Lascaris. The first edition of Homeric Works by Demetrius Halkokondylis in Florence in 1488. The complete work of Aristotle, printed in Venice in 5 volumes between 1495 and 1498 by Aldus Manutius, to name just a few. Their coexistence here highlights the combination of passion for books with a passion for Greece that defined the path of Ioannis Gennadius. It is, I would say, a metaphorical meeting of the exhortation, keep books, soul medicine, that constituted the identity, the ex libris identity of Ioannis Gennadius, with the maxim of Isocrates: the name of the Greeks is no longer of the genus, but of the intellect is, and the Greek language is above genus, of the Byzantine Emperor Theodore Lascaris. And as the exhibition is complemented by donations of part of archives of contemporary Greek artists such as George Seferis, Angelos Terzakis, Elias Venezis, Dimitris Mitropoulos, Vasilis Vasilikos, and others, as well as the archive of Konstantin Tsatsos, we watch the uninterrupted over-time dialogue of Greek thought with itself and the world through transformations, pauses, revivals, and creative tensions. In the years that have gone by, from its official inauguration in April 1926 until today, the Gennadius Library has served as the guardian of Greek and Balkan literature, and at the same time as a place of dialogue and promotion of language, a vibrant research organization that attracts scholars from all over the world by providing access to material of insurmountable value, a bridge between the Greek and international academic community, a cultural laboratory, an aesthetic and spiritual refuge in the heart of Athens. Gennadius Library also invests in actions aimed to the general public, such as exhibitions, lectures, and conferences that bring research closer to the citizen, educational programs for students, and many more. In recent years, it has been digitizing its collections and utilizing new technology without, however, losing its character. Its strength lies in its ability to combine tradition with innovation. In conclusion, I would like to dwell on an observation of the director of Gennadius Library, Dr. Maria Georgopoulou, from an interview with Kathimerini exactly 10 years ago. She had said back then, "Our goal is to abolish the imaginary distance that many Athenians thought separated them from the Gennadius Library. Actions such as those I mentioned above, and exhibitions, both digital and physical ones, based on sensory experience, such as today's, testify that the goal has been achieved. This sensed distance has been bridged. Consider that what unites us Greeks of a time is a culture with unbroken continuity, a language that travels through the centuries, and a common faith in the power of education, knowledge, and creation. This precious legacy must be preserved not only as a heirloom, but as a force turned to the future, as a creative force that connects the invisible thread of our historical continuity with future generations. And towards these generations, all of us have a responsibility. This is why I wish that all people of the library and their associates who honor this responsibility to continue with the same inspiration and the same dynamism, the good work before the next centenarian that is looking forward to be completed too in its turn. Thank you very much.
The speaker is off mic. So I wanted to give you a memorabilia. It's a coin, actually, a drachma for 1926. In 1924, it was the first time that was voted in Greece, the republic without the king. In 1926, this coin was issued. It's Athena from Corinth, and on the other side, it's written Hellenic Republic. We think that this is a way to honor this 100 years, to honor your presence with this gesture that links the past with today's state. Thank you. Thank you for your generosity and your good works.
Good words about me. Ξέρετε, και το ξέρετε καλά.
You know, and I'm sure you know that the word coin, nomisma in Greek, has two meanings. So the first one is coin. The second is what we think. Nomisma in Greek means what we think about something. So I do receive this coin as a way of thinking of what this foundation, Gennadius Library, is. A strong foundation that maintains the link with our historical tradition, our cultural past, which is the driver for the present and the future. Thank you for this honor. The speaker is off mic. Gennadius Library is standing strong for 100 years as an important point of knowledge, and we now have more than 100,000 books in our collection. It's still a space for research and dialogue where researchers and the audience can meet, and where the Greek history continues to be approached and interpreted again and again. So for this centenary, our conference brings together professionals from different fields in order to highlight the transition from the private collections to different public institutions of knowledge, and to also think about the challenges of the presence. So I would like to invite Dr. Mariana Christopoulou, a history professional coming from Ioannina, having studied in the University of Ioannina and the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. Her research is for the 19th century. She has written a book, and her thesis was about Ioannis Gennadius. And she has also worked and documented material from Gennadius Library. Today she is going to talk about, the title is that at the beginning it was Gennadius, his collection, and his vision. Gennadius Library has been my second home while I was doing my thesis on Gennadius, who is actually to whom I actually focus on in my speech today. If we want to talk about Gennadius the collector, we should start by the inauguration of the library in April 1926. The vision appears complete, and through the books and the work that lasted for many, many years. His collecting activity is at its top, and all the visions and any efforts, of course, do not happen overnight. They are being shaped throughout the time. Also, the collections are not just a passion. They're the result of many different factors that have to do with the family origin, the profession, personal interests, the spirit of that time, and the space of the collector. So today, these are the factors we're going to focus on in order to express my opinion that the library was not just a collection, but an important point for the spiritual advancement of Hellenism. And in order to understand the dynamic, we need to start not from the end, but from the beginning. The books and the libraries have been were a tradition for Gennadius' family, and were linked with his father, George Gennadius. Ioannis mentioned for this library, he actually mentioned his father many times, who was a source of inspiration for him, despite the fact that he lost him at the age of 10 years old. His contribution during the revolution and besides these years was indeed significant, and they helped at shaping the education of that time. George Gennadius was also the heart of the National Library. He was a curator and a donor, and he led the foundation for the Monetary Museum. And these were the principles that he aspired to his children. Since his adolescence, Gennadius started collecting books, and very soon he formed the first catalog of the books of his father. He felt comfortable in the library, and from his first trip to England, he kept the card for the entrance card for the National Library. The relation of Gennadius with the libraries and the books was not just his specificity, his own thing. All the male members of the family were linked to books and libraries. His father was a curator of the National Library, but also other members of his family, like Panagiotis Gennadios, donated over 300 volumes to the Library of Cyprus, while Anastasios Gennadius, another member of his family, contributed a lot to enriching the collections. In 1905, he sent from London a collection of books along with a detailed catalogue in order to enrich the collection. However, this donation was blocked and the catalogue was lost. So he revisited his initial plans and donated the books through the American School of Classical Studies. He was found in England in 1863 looking for his professional route. He started working at Raleigh's trading firm, but he didn't make it, so he followed the diplomatic body. Then he went to Constantinople, and in London, actually, the world of the book and knowledge inspired Gennadius. The spirit of the age and the place was very important. Gennadius was inspired by the Victorian era, and he was keeping extracts from newspapers and magazines which were depicting people reading and studying. This shows his interest and his attraction to these areas of study, which he understood as places of real research and also other pictures from schools, from Europe, from America. They were chosen by Gennadius in order to show the international character of this phenomenon, but he was not limited only to the academic aspect of international libraries. He also chose different types of libraries that tried to inspire reading books to lower society classes. In 1926, at the inauguration of the library, he expressed his wish to make the library a school for the people who were not familiar with book curating. He didn't only love books for their content, but also for their rare characters, the specific characteristics for which my colleagues will talk to you in detail. He was collecting catalogs of books in London. He would visit bookstores. He was also in book reading circles in London, and he was also a member of clubs and associations that had to do with education. So the inspiration came from different places and actually enhanced his interest in books. The market itself gave him the opportunity to enrich his collection. So the collection was first an interest, a passion for him that was utilized when he started reading articles in favor of Greece at the British press. When he started working for the diplomatic body, his collection that became a professional need at first, at least, because Ioannis Gennadius did not realize that the diplomat had a very restricted role. He believed that he had to also take initiatives, and of course such a role required deep knowledge and wide information. So he collected any type of information about Greece and the Balkans. He realized that documentation was power. So as he said in one of his articles, I'm not going to tire you with generic things. I am going to give you elements that the British actually consider very important. Many volumes of his collection are dedicated to the aspects on which he worked during his diplomatic career. Of course, the books were a type of diaries for his contacts, but also a type of keeping memories. So this is how some parts of his collection started that were then enriched on a more complete way. So himself and his collection became a more specific, a more specialized type of information for those dealing with Greece from a diplomatic point of view. Vlasto, who had sent a text that was about to be published, he sent it to Gennadius in order to review it, and it's also characteristic that Emile Gran, an academic, in his literature, he mentions a lot the Gennadius Library. His professional activity actually inspired him to collect information, but his personal interests enhanced this inspiration even more. His father was a representative of the Illumination era, so Gennadius also supported that. Korais himself was also a topic of his research, and this is when some important parts of his works were published. For example, the book that you are seeing on your screen. So this was the result was an amazing collection of works inspired by Korais.
these were also weapons. These books were crucial during that period. After second half of 19th century, the notion of progress in Europe had taken dimensions of adoration for the intellectual well-being of nations was at the epicenter of their life. So at the International Paris exhibition, also Greece was found, presenting a detailed catalogue of all what was published until 1866. Gennadius republished all these in English, and he said, so that people of England will know how advanced we are and how much ahead we keep of all the other Eastern nations. So what Gennadius back then said was continued in a more systematic, historical, and scientific way. But it all started after 60 years when it was the inauguration of the Gennadius Library. All these evidence were not limited to the antiquity, despite the fact that it was quite a larger collection. Gennadius adopted this threefold form of Greek history, embracing also Byzantine and modern Greece, including also eras that needed even a larger support. So Gennadius said, of the wisdom and culture, this is what he said addressing foreign listeners, of the wisdom and culture of ancient Greece, your young universities have produced brilliant masters, but he will prosecute in addition a work of important the vindication of Byzantine Greeks. His determination to include all these collections as we were advancing already towards the destruction in Asia Minor front, he still wanted to show how Greeks were had experienced the Illumination era. This vision of his is continuously communicated every time any reader picks one of the books that he had donated to the library. The collecting activity of Ioannis Gennadios was shaped through the interplay of family background, professional demands, intellectual interests, and the broader cultural environment of his time. His library was far more than a private collection. It constituted an organized body of knowledge designed to function as evidence of the historical continuity and intellectual vitality of Hellenism. This may therefore be understood as a deliberate intervention in the way Greece was presented and perceived at international context. To quote his words, I tried, at any rate, sought to contribute, however modestly, to my good name, the standing and prestige of Greece. Thank you very much for your attention.
The speaker is off mic, and unfortunately the sound is really bad. Thank you for your speech that brings us so close to Gennadius. for Mariana, Gennadius is this little John for her. So now I would like to announce, to call to the floor Irini Solomonidi, head librarian of Gennadius Library, and she's also co-host of this conference. She has studied Greek literature and the librarian profession in Paris, and she is interested in the medieval literature. And the title of her speech is The Making of a Library, Ioannis Gennadius and the Legacy of the Founding Collection. Let me also mention that we are going to will proceed with the Q&A session at the end of the second session. So, Irini, the floor is yours. The Gennadius Library is the creation and legacy of Ioannis Gennadius, a diplomat, a scholar, and a bibliophile whose spiritual vision embraced the entire spectrum of the Greek culture. Shaped by his classical education and cosmopolitan life, the library reflects his belief that Greek culture, although rooted in national experience, constitute a universal heritage accessible through knowledge. This vision was institutionalized with the Donation Act of 1922, which turned his personal collection into a public institution under the care of the American School of Classical Studies in Athens. This study examines how a founding collection shaped the identity of a research library, focusing on the spiritual constitution of Gennadius, his collecting practices, and the networks that supported them. Ioannis Gennadius was born in Athens in 1840 and was deeply influenced by his father George Gennadius, whose ideals for education and national responsibility determined his spiritual course. His education at the Protestant College of Malta in high school and his subsequent experience in London contributed to the formation of a bilingual and cosmopolitan personality. From an early age, his collecting activity was systematic, combining a love for the book with careful recording. He moved to London in 1862, and later his diplomatic career brought him to the center of international intellectual and political networks, which proved decisive for the development of his collection. A major turning point was the economic crisis of 1892, which led to the forced divestment of part of his library to Sotheby's in 1895, a loss that he described as a harsh necessity. However, this event marked the beginning of a new phase of collection organization. Since 1902 onwards, with the support of his wife Florence, he rededicated himself to his work with a new spirit, eventually leading to the reconstruction and donation of the library. His diplomatic career, along with his intellectual and bibliographic ambitions, converged in the creation of a research library designed as an open center for the study of Hellenism. The formation of the Gennadius Library was not the product of an accidental accumulation of books, but a lifelong intellectual venture guided by an impressively coherent vision. Gennadius' collecting activity developed in distinct phases, each of which was sealed by his personal maturation, his diplomatic career, and the changing political and cultural landscape of the time. Over the course of almost 8 decades, the collection evolved alongside the formation of his intellectual identity and scientific pursuits, eventually becoming both the expression of a private passion and the foundation of a public institution dedicated to the preservation and study of the Greek culture. Gennadius' bibliophilic interests were manifested as early as his childhood, when he attempted to catalog his father's library, revealing his discipline and strong identification with the Greek spiritual heritage. His own collection began around 1860 with contemporary Greek pamphlets, political newspapers, literary works, many of which he acquired during his studies in Malta and Athens. So these first acquisitions, about 1,000 items, were not rare, but set the main thematic axis of the library: the Greek identity, the journalism, and the modern political life of Greece. The only recorded rarity of this period was acquired around 1872. It was the only known first edition of Eρωτokritos by Vitsentzos Kornaros, which he bought in Athens for about 30 drachmas, according to his declaration. Significant additions to the collection began during his diplomatic service in London. In May 1876, he made his first major purchase at Sotheby's, 87 items from the library of Prince Dimitrios Rodokanakis, which testifies his interest in the world of the Greek and Levantine diaspora. Shortly afterwards, he acquired two important documents: a monumental panoramic depiction of an Ottoman triumphal procession and an album with 111 original watercolors of Ottoman costumes, two of the most important treasures of Gennadius. In 1880, at the auctions of Francis Boynton collection at Sotheby's, he acquired the Baron Hell rooms of Augusta Lythe, including the laurel wreath from Byron's coffin, which marks the beginning of his lifelong devotion to Byron and the Philhellenes. He also acquired a watercolor of Byron in Mesologi by Seymour and Parry at the auction of the Joseph Mayer collection in 1887. In 1885, he bought in Athens the collection of Christos Nikolaidis Philadelpheos, 1,300 items of modern Greek books, brochures, magazines, and material related to the prominent 19th century scholar Adamadios Korais, one of the first important phases of the enrichment of his collection in the field of the modern Greek illumination, the spiritual movement that contributed to the preparation of the Greek Revolution. Between 1888 and 1892, Gennadius acquired some of the rarest items in his collection. In 1891, he acquired the first Greek grammar ever printed. It's actually the first print, the epitome of Constantine Laskaris, as well as the first printed edition of Lukianos of 1496. So these acquisitions, along with numerous manuscripts, travel books, costume albums, and Greek archetypes, were acquired by London. That he acquired by London booksellers and large private auctions, define the cosmopolitan character of the growing library. A complete cultural portrait of Greece and its ancient, Byzantine, and modern dimensions, integrated into the wider Mediterranean world. The abrupt end of his diplomatic career in 1892 threw him into economic crisis. In March and April of 1895, more than 3,000 of his finest books were sold within 10 days to Sotheby's. An alleged collusion of traders, which pressed prices even further, while the mental blow to Gennadius was enormous. Some works were recovered later, such as Stuart and Revett's Antiquities of Athens. Others were permanently lost. Despite the trauma, Gennadius decided to restart. In the years that followed, he adopted a more systematic and targeted collector strategy aimed at establishing a coherent library rather than simply accumulating treasures. Between 1898 and 1913, he strategically enriched his collection. Important acquisitions were a Greek grammar printed by Aldus Manutius, Artemidoros, a manuscript with a manuscript by Ahmed, author of a work on the interpretation of dreams, as well as key works of modern Greek history. The decisive purchase of over 400 Renaissance and classical documents in 1901 gave the collection a main body of humanistic education. In 1904, he acquired an exquisitely bound work by Flavius Josephus. And in 1906, the personal copy of Nelson's Museum is one of the most important books in the collection, with a brilliant history. No sound. We're talking about a book of watercolors with wildflowers of Corfu that had been ordered for the Earl of Guildford, and in 1914 he made the most expensive purchase of his life, the first version, the miniature copy of Lord Pembroke, Homer's Editio Princeps. In 1929, with funds from the American School, he purchased 190 watercolors of Greece from Edward Lear, which are today among the most emblematic artistic acquisitions of the Gennadius Library. His last major purchase, a Sacred Gospel, printed in Venice in 1586, acquired actually belonging to the Ruskin collection, combined monastic bookbinding, Arabic notes, and a brilliant possessive history, summarizing the multi-layered historical density he most appreciated. From the late 1880s, and especially after the next decade, Gennadius adopted what he called grand design, the creation of a comprehensive library that would document the creative genius of Greece in all periods, that influence of Greek culture in the world, as well as the impression that Greece exerted on travelers, scholars, artists, and politicians. This vision led to the formulation of a collection organized around thematic axes, which remain to this day fundamental to the Gennadius Library. We're talking about early versions of ancient Greek literature, Byzantine studies, rare Greek editions of the 15th to the 17th centuries, travel, geography, cartography, Eastern diplomatic history, modern Greek literature and illumination, art, technology, material culture. By 1922, the collection numbered about 26,000 titles, the fruit of 70 years of collecting activity. I would like to talk about cataloging a bit, since it's a bit of a mystery of how this was formed. For Ioannis Gennadius, cataloging was a long process of spiritual and practical constitution, inextricably linked to the constitution of the library itself. His interest in the bibliographic area was expressed from a very young age, At the age of 15, he recorded his cataloged his father's library. He compiled 3 consecutive catalogs, each of which aimed at improving the previous one. So we're talking about 3 different cataloging systems. In the early stages of his own collecting activity, however, he did not yet maintain a formal catalog or register. Instead, he recorded the books individually, marking in pencil on the last sheet of each item the price and date of acquisition, and assigning each item a serial number, and having a very vague list. Of course, he had some interest in recording, but not yet a fully organized system. A decisive change occurred after the Sotheby's auction in 1895. Until then, he had not kept either a register or a systematic list. During the reconstruction of the library, it began to maintain a systematic register where he recorded basic bibliographic data, and at the same time, cataloging was now understood as a next step, a more developed step. Each book bore a number corresponding to its entry in the catalog, while the underscored numbers indicated that the book had been cataloged. After 1903, where he settled in Davere Gardens, Gennadius gradually began to catalog the library. He started with the bulletin catalog, which was developed in a fragmented way without full uniformity, but functioned as an intermediate and essential bibliographic control tool. From the bulletins, from which a very small number is saved, he proceeded to a more ambitious phase. In 1920, he compiled a thematic catalogue of 1,088 entries, perhaps a draft of the bibliography of the Greek Revolution. This marked the transition to systematically organized catalogs. From 1921 onwards, cataloging became more systematic and standardized, producing extensive catalogs such as those on the Greek Revolution, theology, geography, travel. These catalogs were accompanied by classification tables and indexes. At this stage, the catalog was no longer a simple inventory tool, but a structured scientific system. Alongside these main sections, Gennadius also compiled a wide range of individual catalogs reflecting the extent of his collection, like ancient Greek literature, modern Greek literature, the works of Korais, etc. Overall, these catalogs demonstrate that his work was not only theoretical, but was materialized in an extensive and evolving body of catalogued literature research. In his notes, he rejects alphabetical and decimal systems in favor of a strictly thematic classification. An alphabetical list, in his opinion, is useful only when a book is already known, while a thematic list guides research and provides intellectual orientation. At the same time, he insists on the necessity of an alphabetical index as a complement. His model draws inspiration from the French bibliographer Jacques-Charles Brunet. However, he stresses that cataloging must be adapted to the specific character of each library. Since his own collection is dedicated to Greece and the Greek world in all its aspects, as well in its relations with the neighboring peoples and cultures, the catalog must reflect this range and present the material in a logical order. The central principle of his method is what he calls the scientific sequence. The layout of the modules should guide the reader step by step towards the object of the research. Since many projects fall into more than one category, he strongly supports the use of cross-references, which he considers necessary in a research library. Catalogs were often drawn up under difficult circumstances, while books were packaged and transported with no fixed methods and largely unedited. As a result, many of them were temporary and required subsequent revision and redistribution. The card catalog maintained, in his view, remained actually, in his view, an intermediate and irreplaceable tool, ensuring continuity of control when transitioning from a private collection to an institution library. Gennadius perceived cataloging as a process of gradual maturation from simple ownership notes to the bulletin catalog, and finally structured thematic catalogs that led to the idea of the general catalog that he failed to complete but left as a legacy to the Gennadius Library. Cataloging for him was not just a technical process, but the means by which a personal collection could be transformed into a spiritually organized research library capable of guiding scientific research and capturing the historical breadth of Hellenism. In this sense, the catalogue itself can be seen as the intellectual framework that made it possible to transform a private collection into a public research institution. The donation of the collection in 1922 was the culmination of Gennadius' spiritual life work. The act was signed by Ioannis and Florence Gennadius, established the library as a stable institution under the auspices of the American School of Classical Studies in Athens. This decision reflected the desire to create a national monument, but also the understanding that this needed proper scientific organization and international cooperation, and the American school could indeed offer all these things. The Donation Act set out basic principles: the preservation of the unity of the collection, its housing in a specially designed building, its accessibility to scholars, and its continuous development within the framework set by the founder. All these things ensured both the evolution and the adaptability of the library. At its core, the donation embodied a dual vision. It honored the Greek cultural heritage while at the same time integrating it into an international scientific community. By entrusting this library to an American institution in Athens, Gennadius confirmed his belief that Hellenism belongs to all those who participate in this, in its spiritual tradition. After 1926, Gennadius continues to acquire material until his death, enriching his basic collection. In the decades that followed, the library grew significantly, now exceeding 150,000 titles through purchases and significant donations. We can see a manuscript, one of the most important donations. This is by Damianos Kyriazis and the collection of Eleni Stathatu. All these items enhanced the collection for the diaspora and the Byzantine art. These additions broadened the founder's vision, while at the same time reinforced the library's dual identity as a monument and a living research organization. The new material was systematically integrated into the taxonomy system formed by Gennadius, maintaining the coherence of the original intellectual framework. The evolution of cataloging practices in the library reflects the legacy of Ioannis Gennadius. What began as a personal effort through notes, catalogs, evolved into institutional card catalog systems and eventually into an electronic catalog without departing from its original vision. His commitment to thematic cataloging, scientific accuracy, and the perception of the catalog as a research tool remained constant. So in this slide, the general catalog designed by the same can be considered to be implemented today through the online catalog, the digital catalog, which consolidates and makes the entire collection accessible. His legacy, therefore, lies not only in the constitution of the collection, but also in the intellectual context that continues to organize it and make it available to the scientific community. And Entering its second century, the Gennadius Library continues to adapt to the needs of a global scientific community. Its mission emphasizes on accessibility, interdisciplinary research, and digital innovation, ensuring that the collections remain widely available. The ongoing additions reflect emerging fields such as digital humanities, image culture, and global Hellenism, while maintaining continuity with the founder's vision. Through scholarships, exhibitions, and synergies with research institutions, the library remains a guardian of cultural memory and center for the production of new knowledge. The history of the Gennadius Library demonstrates how a founding collection can shape and constantly renew a research institution guided by Gennadius' dedication to classical education and the universality of Greek culture. The library remained faithful to its beginnings, its principles, while evolving in response to the new scientific conditions. Looking to the future, Hellenism it continues to confirm Hellenism as a national heritage and a common international legacy. It maintains the founder's deep conviction that knowledge must be preserved, studied, and made accessible, ensuring that his vision remains a living and evolving force for future generations. Thank you.
Dear Irene, thank you very much for your speech. Please take your seat. Or rather, no. Please stay seated, everybody. We would like to thank His Excellency, the President of the Hellenic Republic, and I'm coming to escort you out. Thank you very much. Please, everybody else, remain seated. Thank you. Departure of His Excellency, the President of the Hellenic Republic, Mr. Konstantinos Tassoulas. Good afternoon, and welcome to the second session for today at the conference where we celebrate the Centenarian of American School of Classical Studies at Athens.
As we celebrate 100 years of the Gennadius Library. In this session, we turn to three core components of the collection: Incunabula, maps, and post-Byzantine manuscripts, to examine acquisition patterns, the book trade environment, and Gennadius' intellectual priorities that shaped his collection. We will save all questions for the end of the session, as well as questions for the previous session. And let's turn to our first speaker, Jerry de la Roca de Candal. Specializes in Renaissance Greek printing, book trade, and circulation of Incunabula, particularly in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Ottoman Empire. He's a research fellow at Rome Sapienza, an honorary research fellow at Modern Languages, Oxford. He co-curated in 2023 the exhibition Alphabeta, Learning Greek in Italy, in Brera, Milan, and is now co-editing with Nigel Wilson the Greek book, An Introduction to Its History, Production, and Styles. He's also a trustee of the Venice Imperial Fund, a Searle advisor, and president of the Society for the Preservation of Rare Books, that in 2023 funded a project to provide anoxic treatment to the special collections of the Zakynthos Public Library. So Jerry will examine Gennadius' Incunabula through the lens of collection and cataloging practices. Jerry.
Thank you. So first of all, before we begin, I just wanted to express two thoughts. One is to express my sincere, not formal gratitude to Maria Georgopoulou and to Irini Solomonidi, because if my experience working here in Greece has been so fantastic over the past 10 years, it is mostly thanks to the initial contacts and the continued help that I have received from them and from the whole Gennadius institution. Secondly, please accept my apologies. I am recovering from a cold, so I have a particularly charming voice. For those who know it, normally it's much sexier right now. Yes, so this paper is intended to address a few questions about Johannes Gennadius, about how Johannes Gennadius collected his Incunabula, how he recorded them, what drove his choices, and whether his preferences changed after he was forced to sell a major part of his collection in 1895. Unlike most major collectors of his time, Gennadius was highly specialized. If there was not a relation with Greece, he candidly did not care, and was in fact very proud of his disdain for Latin literature. I quote, "But of Latin classics it contained," about his collection, "and still contains only Quintus Curtius Rufus." This principle was applied throughout his life, displaying from his earliest years a focus that at a particular moment, as will be shown later, may have been perceived as a shortcoming, but on the long run turned out to be his greatest strength. In this context, it is important to bear in mind that Gennadius was at times wealthy, but his resources were by no means unlimited, so he could only afford a certain number of rare books. When it came to Incunabula, almost invariably purchased on the London scene, Gennadius collected two sorts of books: by Greeks, ranging from classical texts to the Renaissance grammars of Chrysoloras and Laskaris, with a preference for editions in the original language, but not disdaining translations; and works by Westerners, ranging from Giovanni Crastone's Greek-Latin lexicon, Pius II's pamphlets regarding the Ottoman advances in Greece, or Breidenbach and Mandeville's travelogues. He bought, however, vast quantities of newer books from all over Europe when he received the catalogues of booksellers, again, only as long as they dealt with Greece, but often hundreds at a time. Beyond the UK, he bought from France, Italy, Germany, and Greece, ordering in bulk from dealers or agents such as Francis Edwards in the UK, Gustav Fock and Otto Harasowitz in Germany, Yanis Vlachogiannis in Greece, Ernest Leroux in France, or Leo Samuel Olszki in Italy. To begin with, and although partly already discussed, it will be useful to briefly look at key points in Gennadius' life with regards to his collecting. The essential points here are that in 1870 he joins the Greek Foreign Office, still in London, already in London. Between 1870 and 85 he is mostly in London, but also covering other posts, so there are sometimes sharp declines in his purchases caused by the fact that he is not in London. A major turning point is 1885. He becomes minister resident, so ambassador in London. In 87 also covers The Hague, and in 88 Washington, meaning he is basically ambassador in free countries and has free stipends or free salaries. In 1892 he resigns, he is dismissed, resigned. In 1895 he sells part of his library, about 3,000 out of 13,000 books. In 1902 he marries. In 1910 he becomes again ambassador in London and again in The Hague. And in 1932 he dies in London. For today's standards, the expression "sitting on the fence" is probably best to describe the attitude most book historians would feel towards some of Gennadius' collecting behaviors. Replacing older bindings, a regrettable practice he often indulged in, resulting in the loss of potentially useful provenance information, may still, just barely, be considered understandable for contextual reasons, as it was fashionable among collectors back in the days to instill uniformity in their libraries, even though there were clearly times when Gennadius truly overdid himself, for instance with his vellum copy of the 1496 Lucian, adding medallions and rather amusing clasps, or his 1476 Lascaris that has been seen earlier. But the habit in which he persevered, and that was absolutely condemnable, blameworthy, and censurable, was that of having the pages of early printed books washed with chemical products in order to reach for the ideal perfect copy, what Gennadius called catharsis. As if, in fact, he writes it down there, the price he paid for it. As if the book were hot off the press, untouched, removing any evidence of use, in particular marginal annotations, but sometimes, unfortunately, even ownership inscriptions. Here too, we should probably blame the context, although by the early 20th century, both these practices had started dying out, making Gennadius somewhat of a late practitioner. It should be added, however, that some of the books he bought had already been washed by previous owners, and that, most importantly, a closer inspection might highlight that in his later years, he limited himself to washing and ironing stained copies, basically a dry cleaning service for rare books, allowing for the annotations to survive. But Gennadius sometimes changed bindings and washed books decades after buying them, so it is hard to tell whether the books that today preserve annotations do so merely because he had not had the time to get to them. Suspended sentence on this matter. Redemption, so to speak, comes from another side of his collecting habits. It is important to understand that while in many ways Gennadius was a typical collector, subject to the fashions of his time, in other ways he was highly unusual. In particular, he was a compulsive annotator of information that today turns out to be extremely useful to understand the movement of rare books in London, and to an extent elsewhere, at the apogee of the antiquarian book market. But in order to navigate Gennadius's collecting patterns, one must follow the trail of breadcrumbs that he left throughout his compulsive annotations and cataloging system, or systems, one should say, as Irini mentioned earlier. There are three main sources to understand how Gennadius bought his books: his accession catalogues, his 1895 sale catalogue, and his own annotations in pencil. Have I been behind a whole... Sorry, 1 second. Number 5? Well, anyway, the first two elements, accession books and sale catalogues, set the framework to understand his cataloging system. The manuscript accession catalogues are 2 volumes covering the period 1895-1913. Volume 1, 10,000 to 20,000, covers the year 1895 to 1904. Volume 2, 20,001 to 30,000, covers the years 1905 to 1913, including information such as basic imprint, month of purchase, so basic imprint, so title, place of printing, year. In the gutter, you can't see it very well, the month when he bought it. The dealer who sold it to him, or the agent, and the price, almost invariably expressed in pounds, and occasional notes if deemed necessary. Past 30,000, unfortunately, no manuscript accession catalogue survives. Gennadius apparently produced a typescript. I mean, he didn't apparently. There is a typescript, but it's not clear whether there was also a manuscript, but only containing bibliographical information, that is, lacking purchase dates, dealers, and prices. Books themselves are numbered with a numerical code above 30,000, but only occasionally provenance information in pencil is found inside these books. It is interesting to observe that the accession numbers of many of the years, but not all of them, are suspiciously round, suggesting some sort of planning ahead or conventional decision made in advance, though further research is required to understand what would lead Gennadius to act this way. See all the numbers that are very round. It seems hard to imagine that he was able to perfectly hit a round number every year, but it's not entirely clear to me why he would do that. A fairly well-known turning point in Gennadius' collecting career took place in 1895, when he was forced to sell a first large portion of his library, due to financial hardship. This was a consequence of his resignation from his diplomatic post in August 1892, following Prime Minister Trikoupis' re-election a few months earlier, and the recalling of most ambassadors in a context of spending review. Despite Gennadius' bitter remarks about Trikoupis, the situation was admittedly grave enough to lead to a declaration of public insolvency a few months later, in December 1893. Regrettably, we are bankrupt. Gennadius would not be employed again until as late as 1910, marking another major turning point in his collecting capabilities. In 1895, facing severe financial hardship, Gennadius was forced to sell approximately a quarter of his collection, 3,200 items, concentrating on the most valuable of his items from his collection. Approximately 10,000 he kept, which is why his accession books begin at number 10,000. He was planning to catalogue the books he had collected prior to 1895, a task he never managed to tackle. But Gennadius purchased an annotated copy of his library's sale. It was annotated by Hoot, or by someone working for Hoot, who was another major book collector. So you can see the annotations on the left with prices, and on the right with the names of the booksellers who bought the books from his collection. He interleaved it, so he added one blank sheet next to each printed sheet, and added information on the provenances of the books that went up for sale, allowing to reconstruct with great clarity the content of his Incunabula collection in 1895. So thanks to this document, we know when, from whom, and for how much he bought the books, as well as who bought them at his sale and for how much. For the remaining part of the collection still currently part of the Gennadius Library, that is, the books purchased before 1895, but the ones he did not sell, or those purchased after 1913, one can only hope to find Gennadius's manuscript annotation in pencil inside the copies. But this is not always the case, and unfortunately, they are not numbered. That is, the books before 1895 do not have numbers, so you don't have anything to go by. His books, should you find any outside of Gennadius, are distinctive for the use of his code to conceal the prices he paid using Greek letters, as you can see. So the price he paid for the binding, below the price he paid for the book in 1881, and as you can see, the binding was actually made in 1908, so almost 30 years later. Going back to his accession books, it is interesting to observe that the overall number of purchases in Incunabula and other books over the period 1895-1913, it's the only one on which we can have massive information because they are all annotated in one single source, not necessarily reflect moments of hardship or prosperity. In 1901, for instance, certainly not one of Gennadius's best years financially, he acquired almost 3,000 books. Whereas in 1903, just married, and with a slightly improved financial situation, he purchased only short of 400. Perhaps he was busy with marriage life. But it is also possible, more likely, that he purchased more pamphlets, so just quantity does not represent, financial cost. This might also be the occasion to dispel a suspicion. If marrying a wealthy woman may have eased Gennadius's financial situation, probably by covering a series of daily expenses, it is a fact that he never used a single pound from his wife's fortunes to buy his own books, which is also why he had to wait until 1910 to resume buying in style. This might also be the occasion to mention a rather endearing fact, that as a surprise wedding gift, Florence bought back a few of his books that she was able to find on the market, and Gennadius quickly annotated the gift in his sale catalogue. Well, yes. But when it comes to Incunabula, Gennadius's buying patterns are heavily determined by the moments of hardship and prosperity. He bought substantially when he had his employment, as you can see, particularly between 1885 and 1992, there are major purchases. And particularly, there's a spike in 1910 when he again becomes ambassador. And almost nothing when he was dismissed from his post. Particularly see the sad years from 1893 to 1902 are very, very sad years for the purchase of Incunabula. Yes. Proof of what's said above about using or not using his wife's wealth comes from the purchase of the Hoskia sale in 1908. The sale happened in 1908. He bought 10 Incunabula and lots of other books, but only finished paying them in 1910 and received them in 1910 when he was, again, employed as an ambassador. So clearly he was not using his wife's money to buy books, which I think is a good thing, honestly. It is also very interesting to look at the 1895 sale catalogue as a source in backlight about his Incunabula collecting patterns. Just to give a sense of what this represents, we're looking at categories of Incunabula that Gennadius had in 1895, including the ones that are currently still in the library, but also including the ones he sold. It's not looking at the books that he bought after that date. And I divided them in 4 groups. So you have Greek books, the pamphlets or anything about current affairs, translations, and travelogues. So one can clearly observe that he decided to keep the crown jewels and most of the pamphlets, the crown jewels being the Evolution in Vellum and the Lascaris of 1476, with kind of monuments of Greek printing or absolutely remarkable copies. And the pamphlets, probably because the pamphlets were harder to find and also not very valuable financially, so the time and effort to find them would have been greater than the money he would have made by selling them. While he sold most of the classics, most translations, and all travel literature. After 1895, at least judging by what he bought back, or was able to buy back, he concentrated almost exclusively on Greek books, neglecting the translations and travel literature almost entirely. So it gives you a sense of how his direction in collecting has shifted over the years once he has to rebuild his library. Again, it could be that some of the books he just was not able to find, but you can see kind of a tendency going on here. Right. It is also very interesting to look at the already said this. It is worth adding a note to highlight how resources such as material evidence in Incunabula and owners of Incunabula can help researchers dealing with the documents such as these, even when not looking specifically at Incunabula. Of the 57 Incunabula sold by Gennadius in 1895, we currently know the whereabouts of at least 8 of them, thanks to material evidence in Incunabula. 6 are in Oxford, 1 in Manchester, and 1 in Washington, D.C. Beyond material evidence in Incunabula, a further copy of Gaza's 1495 grammar is currently again with the bookseller Quaritch, who had purchased the very same copy for Gennadius at one of the Crawford's sale, although it is not quite clear when Gennadius sold it, since there are no records of this copy entering or exiting the collection. It is possible, sorry, give me a second. Progressively losing my voice. It is possible that since he already had another copy of the same edition from the Didot sale, he simply sold it right away. Soon my colleague Paolo Sackett will discuss Gennadius's disappointment at a few booksellers after his 1895 sale, including Quaritch. Partly to atone for this, I am sure, our friend Andrea Mazzocchi, who currently works for Quaritch, has given full availability, in fact, to transfer this very copy to be rejoined with its kind of Incunabula siblings at the Gennadius, but unfortunately customs made it a bit too complicated, so it's still in London. But if you wish to buy a book by Gennadius, it's for sale right now, so think about it. Just saying. Very, very useful help also came from owners of Incunabula, since often checking for names such as these, because Gennadius's handwriting is not the easiest at times, that could only be read in part, often produced hints or hits and identifications. So by checking the first letters or the last letters, it was actually possible to find book dealers or others who, in fact, matched the ones Gennadius was working off, even though I couldn't actually read some of these names entirely. Plus, sometimes Gennadius misspelled the names because he had heard the names, but he didn't actually see them written down. Conclusion. In closing, I will leave you with 2 scans that I found relating to Gennadius's entries in the United States. The first is interesting because I don't think he lied about his age. He would have been about 42 at the time. I like to believe that the customs officer misunderstood his age, or he lied about his age. The second one in particular refers to the 1921 journey that eventually lit the spark that led to the creation of the Gennadius Library. So it is nice to unearth new documents to celebrate the 100 years of this institution. We also learn from these US customs documents that Gennadius was neither a polygamist nor an anarchist. I thought you should know. Yeah. More seriously, there were many collectors who were substantially wealthier than Gennadius, had larger collections and much rarer books. Yet today, some of them are barely known, when not entirely forgotten. This is because what Gennadius lacked in material resources, he greatly made up for through his drive and determination to build a unique collection, the one next to which we stand today. In many ways, he was also lucky, since the events that contributed to the association between Gennadius's collection and the American School of Archaeology in Athens were all but obvious. But overall, it can only be described as a great mix of stubborn and focused book collecting and a splash of kairos, of carpe diem, that led to the Gennadius's collection not only being preserved intact, but also as a unique institution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jerry. Let us now delve a little deeper into Gennadius's connections within the broader network of booksellers and the trade environment. And the second speaker of the session is Paolo Sachet, who works on the impact of printed books on the intellectual political history of early modern Europe, including censorship and propaganda, the reception of classical and patristic literature, and book collecting practices across time. He is currently a research fellow at Sapienza University for the Print Review S project, studying the Italian Incunabula held in Harvard and Yale. He's the author of Publishing for the Popes and co-editor of several collected volumes, and he's also co-editor-in-chief of Agape, a database tackling the printed reception of the Greek fathers in Renaissance Europe. Paolo.
Thank you. Thank you, Vera, for this kind introduction, and thanks to me as well, from me as well, to Maria and Irini for involving me in this celebration. And I'll try to offer a compliment to Jerry's talk, contextualizing Gennadius' collecting practices within the complicated system of London bookselling and auction houses at the end of the 19th century. Because behind every great collector lies an intricate web of facilitators and competitors. Johannes Gennadius was no exception. Driven above all by his passion for early printed books, he had to contend with numerous challenges in building his library, constantly negotiating, both with others and with himself, and the wife at some point, between timing, desire, access to information, and financial means. What is unusual, however, is the meticulous way in which Gennadius recorded his acquisitions, leaving behind a guide to a system of relationship that is normally confidential and thus rather impervious. In this paper, I examined the network of collectors and dealers through whom Gennadius came to acquire his Incunabula. I will build on Jerry's talk, and I should add, on notes he generously shared with me. Gennadius' extensive body of evidence is particularly valuable for the history of the book trade, as he spent much of his life at the very center of the action. That great bazaar which London had become by the turn of the 19th century. For decades, the city had dominated the antiquarian book market, taking over from Paris after the French Revolution, before being in part superseded by New York in the mid-20th century. London was, after all, the largest city in the world, the beating heart of a global empire under Queen Victoria and Edward VII. It teemed with people of every origin, and yet its book world formed only a tiny fraction of society, even of the elite society. A rarefied milieu, almost a gentleman's club, in which most members knew one another and deployed their influence, wealth, and expertise in the pursuit of a shared prize, rare books of the past. A small universe of passion and greed, as this caricature by Thomas Rollestone neatly elucidates. To structure our overview of Gennadius' place within this milieu, It is helpful to take the year 1895 as a watershed. We heard many times. This is when he was compelled to auction part of his collection. Prior to this date, in the first phase of his frenetic activity as a collector, Gennadius benefited from the dispersal of several remarkable libraries brought onto the London market. One institution in particular functioned as a veritable temple, Sotheby's. At the time, the firm was located off the Strand in Wellington Street and traded under the names of two skilled former employees who had come to manage it, John Wilkinson and Edward Gross Hodge. Within the contemporary world of books, Sotheby's had no equal, overshadowing even its historical rival, Christie's, which at this time tended to focus more heavily on works of art. On the screen is Sotheby's sale room in 1888, with Hodge as auctioneer in the center and many of the main booksellers around, but Gennadius is not there. For Sotheby's, but he did attend a lot of these sales, and in particular, saw Gennadius playing a role as a buyer. The first took place in 1886, shortly after he had secured the post of Minister Residence of Greece in the United Kingdom. The library on offer was that of Michael Hoodle, a prominent English collector of the previous century, known to book historians for his habit of recording prices and early provenances directly on the end paper of his books, as you can see. The following year, in February 1887, came the sale of Baron Achille Seyer, a French bibliophile with marked interest, as many of his contemporaries and French collector, in fine bindings, including volumes bound for Grolier, Detout, and Hoym. Seated at Sotheby's, Gennadius bid on at least 15 lots from a recently formed and yet already extraordinary collection, the Bibliotheca Lindesiana. Assembled by the Earl of Crawford, this collection contained a vast number of fine incunabula and was dispersed into principal sales in 1887 and 1889. Finally, mention should be made of the library of Edward Sullivan, Lord Chancellor of Ireland and a classical scholar, which was sold in 1890. Gennadius also secured one of two items in other major sales handled by Sotheby's. One may recall those of the Beckford Library at Hamilton Palace, described by Simons de Ricci, the great historians of this period, as a cabinet of bibliographical rarities and freaks, because of his eclectic nature, as well as the library of Sir Thomas Phillips, so vast a collection of manuscripts and texts printed on vellum that it required 22 sales for its dispersal between 1886 and 1938, so long after Gennadius' death. And from time to time, you can still see pieces of this major collection popping out on the market, including this one that is just nothing but scraps of vellum and stuff that he liked to collect. Right. So Gennadius also acquired two items from the choice portion of an historical library sold in 1892. The one formed over generation by the Hungarian family of the Aponi. The remainders are in the family castle in Oponice, Slovakia, a great wedding volume, apparently, according to the website. The only significant occasion on which Gennadius ventured outside Sotheby's sales rooms concerned his early days as a collector, when in 1881 he purchased 3 books at the Paris sale of the library of Ambroise Firmin Didot. Didot was a celebrated printer and patch canter, as well as a committed scholar of the Greek language and a philhelleny. So such a profile naturally attracted Gennadius' interest. Further research is needed to establish whether Gennadius participated in these sales in person or relied on intermediaries. What is certain is that he acquired other incunable from booksellers who regularly purchased on commission for private clients, in addition to enlarging their own stock. In this way, Gennadius obtained items from the sale he did not attend, most notably 4 copies from the spectacular collection of the Earls of Sunderland, a vast library of over 20,000 printed books dating from the late 17th century and dispersed across 5 sales at Patrick and Simpson, so not Sotheby's, between 1881 and 1883. Among the dealers to whom Gennadius most frequently turned in this period, Bernard Quaritch stands out. This is hardly surprising given the primacy this talented German bookseller had acquired and achieved in the final quarter of the 19th century within the London, and indeed global, antiquarian book trade. Quaritch's principal competitor at this time, Ellis, is mentioned in relation to only 3 Incunabula. It should be noted, however, that Frederick Ellis, the firm founder, who managed to act as the official buyer for the British Museum, retired in 1885, precisely when Gennadius began to buy more extensively. 2 minor booksellers were also occasionally involved in Gennadius' acquisition before 1895. On the one hand, there was J.J. Layton, a bookbinding firm originally, only then starting to branch out into the trade of antiquarian books. On the other, we find William Riddler, a more elusive figure. Successor to Thomas Arthur at 45 Booksellers Row on the Strand, a nice street that doesn't exist any longer, where you can buy a lot of books, because it was roughly like Rue de Saint-Jacques in Paris. Riddler supplied Incunabula to second-ranking collectors, including the astronomer John Couch Adams in Cambridge, the Glasgow professor John Ferguson, and T.R. Bakunin, the All Souls College librarian in Oxford. We now reach a turning point in Gennadius' life as a bibliophile. Stripped of his post in 1895, or forced to resign, he was also forced to arrange the sale of a select portion of his library, needless to say, through Sotheby's auction. Parting with over 3,000 of his finest books was in itself a traumatic experience, but matters were made even more bitter by the low prices they fetched from the London dealers he had known for years. His resentful comment revealed a mixture of frustration and disenchantment, yet he carefully refrained from naming the booksellers who had provoked his anger. Who then were they? His marked copy that Jay showed us, the one of his own catalogue, allow us to identify 4 dealers who bought the lion's share. Quaritch led the charge, followed by Riddler and 2 relatively newcomers, Tregaskis and Nichols. So the figures are just related to Incunables, but the pattern is there for the rest of the library. So keeping this in mind, we now turn to the second phase of Gennadius' activity. By the time he had regained sufficient financial strength to re-enter the buyer's arena, tentatively in 1902 and more consistently from 1910, the landscape has changed. This is less apparent in the case of auction houses. Sotheby's continued to dominate the book trade, though it underwent changes in ownership and relocated to the new premises in New Bond Street in Mayfair that were most suited to expand in the art market. The firms handled nearly all the sales in which Gennadius participated, including those of 3 libraries, particularly rich in classical text, the collection of Harry Huth, the Earl of Pembroke, and Sir George Holford. The most significant from Gennadius' perspective, however, took place in June 1908 and involved part of the library rapidly assembled by Henry Hoskier. A scrupulous biblical scholar engaged in the study of the New Testament, Hoskier spent on books the fortune his father has made as a banker and director of the Guinness Brewery. The real shift in this second phase concerned the booksellers Gennadius chose to trust. Layton was the only figure from the earlier period with whom he continued to work. Riddler was abandoned, while not a single book was acquired from the 2 other dealers who had been particularly active at Gennadius' sale, Tregaskis and Nichols. The absence of one name, however, is particularly striking, that of Quaritch. Yes, true, the founder had died in 1899, but the business was still flourishing and was successfully continued by his son, Bernard Alfred Quaritch. Yet Gennadius turned instead to Quaritch's great rival, Meg's Brothers, for his increasingly rare acquisition on the London market. One such purchase took place in 1907 through a rising figure in the city book world, the Polish dealer Wilfrid Voynich. Voynich secured for Gennadius a copy of the Aldine edition of Theodor Gaza Greek grammar, yet another copy. It should also be noted that in this second phase, Gennadius showed a marked preference for a select group of refined international dealers, who brought onto the market a new supply of Incunabula, taking advantage of the availability of books in Italy and Germany, and perhaps offering more competitive prices than the well-established London firms. Gennadius acquired 4 books from Leo Olszki, the leading bookseller in Italy and an indefatigable hunter and scholar of 15th century imprints. This includes a volume from the Oscar sale that Gennadius had apparently failed to obtain in the auction room, Marulus Tarkaniota's epigrams printed in Florence in 1497. 2 imposing Aldine editions, so printed by Manuscript, Theocritus and the Thesaurus Cornucopia, had already reached Gennadius' library in 1905 through a flamboyant Italian dealer, Tommaso de Marinis, who had just opened his shop in Florence in direct competition with his former mentor, Olszki. In 1909, Gennadius also purchased a copy of Tailat's Oration Against the Turk from the Rosenthal in Munich. And around the same time, he acquired another important humanist pamphlet, Piccolomini's Lament on the Fall of Constantinople, to which we are very close, of course. On that occasion, he turned to Herbert Welter, the most successful German dealer and publisher in Paris, better known for his facsimiles edition of the Gutenberg Bible than for his trade in early printed books. While regularly publishing catalogues, these dealers made their fortune by arranging en bloc acquisition and private offers of outstanding items for the wealthiest collectors of their days. The bulk of their transaction happened in a league Gennadius could not afford to play in. Quaritch, Olszki, de Marinis, and the Rosenthals were particularly active with American tycoons, such as J.P. Morgan in New York, Harry Huntington in California, and Harry Walters in Baltimore. The center of book collecting had rapidly been moving beyond the ocean, ushering in a new era of deep-pocketed bibliophiles, often entertaining a less exclusive and emotional relation with the monuments of Western printing, the ancient and modern history of Greece, and the European Renaissance. While he conducted his life and built his library as an English gentleman, Gennadius too ultimately found help and inspiration in the United States. Through the Gennadeion we are celebrating today, he made sure his legacy and his vision of the Greek culture would outlive him to the benefit of future generations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So let us now move from Incunabula to maps and their place in the collection of Ioannis Gennadius. Our next speaker is George Tolias, who studied at Sorbonne University and has worked for many years at the Institute of Neo-Hellenic Research in the National Hellenic Research Foundation, where he was in charge of the research program entitled Geographical Culture and History of Cartography. And since 2014, the École Pratique des Hautes Études, where he's in charge of the seminar Representations of Space, Late Medieval and Early Modern Period. He has published books and articles on the history of perceptions of Greek space, on the history of archaeology, the Greek studies, the history of cartography, travel literature, and geography. Dr. Tolias, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm not teaching at the Sorbonne, I'm teaching at the École Pratique des Hautes Études. Sorry. And I would like, first of all, να ζητήσω συγγνώμη από τους Έλληνες ακροατές, γιατί δεν είχα καταλάβει ότι μπορούμε να μιλήσουμε ελληνικά. Εκπαιδεύτηκα να το κάνω αγγλικά και δεν θα είναι και τόσο καλό όσο θα ήταν στα ελληνικά. English. So, but my English, this is the difference. So, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends and dear colleagues, first and foremost, I have to express my sincere gratitude to the organizers of this symposium, marking the centenary of the Gennadius Library, for their gracious invitation. It's a great honor and a great pleasure, a genuine pleasure, to participate at the celebration of this century, of the first century of Gennadius Library life, and to be with you tonight. A lot of friends that I didn't see for a while. So I would also like to extend my warmest thanks to the library's director, my dear friend Maria Georgopoulou, as well as to its chief librarian, Irini Solomonidou, not only for the invitation, but also for their patience and generosity in responding to my many and continuous inquiries, and for kindly indulging what may at times have been rather excessive requests. So the title of my presentation is Mapping Hellenism, Fragmentation, Reconstruction, and the Dynamic Epistemology of Cartography in Ioannis Gennadios Library. Between Codex and Scrapbook, the library assembled by Ioannis Gennadios constitutes one of the most intellectually ambitious constructions of modern Hellenism. It was conceived not merely as a repository of books on Greece and the Near East, but as a comprehensive archive designed to document the historical presence, the cultural production, and the intellectual continuity of Hellenism across time and space, together with its perception by the West. Bringing together printed texts, manuscripts, maps, prints, and archival materials, the collection forms a unified yet internally heterogeneous system. Its guiding ambition extends beyond bibliophily towards a far more complex objective, the reconstruction of Hellenism as a dynamic historical and cultural whole. The notion of reconstruction is essential. What is at stake is not the passive accumulation of material, but the active reconstruction of a historical and cultural continuum that is, by its very nature, discontinuous, dispersed, fragmented, and layered. The collection does not merely preserve traces of Hellenism. It attempts to reorganize them into a form of intelligibility, proposing, in other words, a comprehensive reconstruction of Hellenism grounded on primary sources, a sophisticated mapping of Hellenism. In this sense, the library addresses a fundamental difficulty: how to articulate coherence within a historical reality that has never been fully unified. Hellenism unfolds across different temporalities: ancient, Byzantine, early modern, Ottoman, and modern, and across shifting political frameworks from empires to nation-states, not to forget the free cities of the antique past. It is equally marked by movement, migrations, diasporas, and networks that extend far beyond the geographical limits of what is conventionally defined as Greece. The collection, therefore, does not simply gather materials. It constructs relationships between them, allowing dispersed traces to be read as part of a larger configuration. Within this system, cartographic material plays a crucial, though structurally complex and ambivalent role. The collection includes more than 3,350 maps and atlases, ranging from rare early 15th century manuscript traditions to early 20th century ethnographic cartography of the Balkan Peninsula. One could say that no cartographic item failed to capture the interest of the systematic, if not obsessive, collector. Printed and manuscript maps, rare acquisitions and newspaper clippings, luxury editions and inexpensive informative engravings, cartographers' archives and typographical proofs of unpublished maps, valuable printed atlases and even composite atlases of exceptional rarity all found their place within the collection's broad and meticulous program, in which aesthetic and collecting criteria are combined with documentary scholarly practices. As we heard it a lot of times, the original donation of Ioannis Gennadios in 1922 already comprised approximately 26,000 rare books, manuscript prints, and archival materials, forming the foundation corpus of the library. Within this broader ensemble, cartography is deeply embedded in the collection, yet it does not exist as an autonomous domain. There is no separate map collection in the modern sense, no continuous series or organized according to cartographic criteria. Maps are instead dispersed across the entire corpus. They appear within books, within archives, within albums, within the scrapbook system that Gennadios developed, and of which I will speak more later. They are repeatedly recontextualized, extracted, recombined. Their meaning derives not from their autonomy as cartographic objects, but from their interaction with the textual and visual materials of the library. This produces a shift that is both subtle and profound. The focus moves away from the map as a stable object towards mapping as a process, an operation that unfolds across different media and different forms of knowledge. What emerges is not a collection of maps, but a system in which cartography participates in a broader operation, the mapping of Hellenism itself, not only as territory, but as a historically layered and culturally constructed landscape. Cartographic treasures, objects, processes, and visions. The richness of this cartographic presence becomes more tangible when one considers a number of significant items that illuminate both the chronological depth and the internal diversity of the collection. Among the earliest strata stands the manuscript tradition of Bondelmondi's Liber Insularum Archipelagi, represented by a 15th century copy, one of the 60 surviving copies of the book, together with the almost complete series of Italian, French, and British, at the end, Isolari, produced after the model of Bondelmondi. These works belong to a moment in which the Greek world is approached through a hybrid form of fragmented geographical knowledge, combining description, narrative, and visual representation. They do not yet conform to modern cartographic conventions. Instead, they articulate a proto-topographical vision in which space is experienced through movement, through travel, observation, and inscription. Geography here is inseparable from itinerarian memory. A very different form of cartographic knowledge is embodied in the remarkable Atlas Factice containing 175 maps compiled for the Royal Court of Turin after 1692. It bears the coat of arms of the House of Savoy, and it was bought, I think, from Scheffer, from the demolition of Scheffer's library, although it was not included in the catalog, as I checked. I don't know how he had access to this exceptionally rare thing. It's one of the 250 surviving Atlas Factice in public libraries. This is a composite object assembles heterogeneous materials, early printed maps of Greece, Marco Boschini's Il Regno Tutto di Candia, printed on vellum and colored, you see it there at the left. A manuscript atlas of Crete, and a set of unpublished proofs of maps of Greek islands by André Thevet. The unity of the atlas is not given, but constructed, reflecting an early modern practice of assembling knowledge through selection and juxtaposition. Following the example of the great map collectors of the 17th century, who compiled This is Atlas Factis. Gennadius compiled his own composite atlas. Sorry, this is from the previous. His own composite atlas, a royal folio with 41 large maps of Greece printed, consisting of independent editions of maps extracted from atlases between 1680 and 1795. I show you some items. This is the catalogue of Gennadius Atlas Factis. And here you have some maps that are included in the atlas. This is a very rare map. It's the only copy I know. Not important cartographically, but rare as a print. Following the chart of Greece by Rigas Velestinlis introduces yet another dimension, monumental in scale and conceptual ambition. It exceeds the boundaries of conventional cartography. It is at once a geographical representation, a historical synthesis, and a political manifesto. Its spatial organization integrates antiquity, contemporary geography, and symbolic meaning, projecting a vision of Hellenism that is both retrospective and anticipatory. It's the last work published by Rigas before his arrest and his death. 19th century materials reinforce the interplay between cartography and historical experience. The works associated with Makrianis and Panagiotis Zographos transform the War of Independence into spatial narratives. Gennadius bought one of the two surviving copies of the work. It's a manuscript, painted maps. And at the same time, official boundary maps of the Greek state translate political realities into cartographic form, demonstrating how territory itself becomes an object of representation and negotiation. The story of how this map was made is exceptionally thrilling. Manuscript atlases from the Venetian occupation of the Morea, and not only, reveal cartography as an instrument of governance and strategy, while the archives of cartographers, such as, this is two atlases from the two maps of the Grimani Atlas, while archives of cartographers such as Barbier du Bocage and Guillaume de Vaudoncourt expose the intellectual labor behind mapping, comparison, correction, and synthesis. Taken together, these materials demonstrate that Gennadius' collection preserves not only maps, but cartography as a practice, an evolution set, an evolving set of operations through which a space is described, interpreted, and historically situated. The Gennadius maps within the Greek cartographic collections. The importance of the collection becomes clearer when viewed within the broader context of Greek cartographic holdings. With approximately, we said 3,500, but the pre-19th century, the historical material, let's say, is between 2,500 and 3,000 maps in the Gennadius Library. And with this amount of holdings, the library stands among the major repositories in Greece. It is comparable to the National Library of Greece holdings, whose holdings are estimated between 3,000 and 6,000 maps for the pre-1900 material, and significantly larger than the Finopoulos and the Samurka collections. The Hellenic Parliament Library, while important, remains more limited in scale for historical maps. Yet, what distinguishes the Gennadius collection is not its size alone, but its structure. Other collections treat maps as autonomous objects, forming coherent cartographic corpora. The Gennadius Library, the Gennadius collection, does not. It integrates maps into a broader documentary system where they coexist with texts, images, and archival materials. This reflects a different epistemological orientation. The aim is not to construct a history of cartography, but to mobilize cartographic material within a larger cultural project, the reconstruction of Hellenism. A dual and interdependent collecting practice for Gennadius. The originality of the Gennadius Library lies not only in the richness of its holding, but in the coexistence of two distinct and interdependent modes of collecting, which together define its epistemological structure. On the one hand stands what may be described as the codex-based system, the main body of the collection, comprising books, manuscripts, and archival units. The use of the term codex here is deliberate. It does not simply refer to the physical form of the bound book, but to a specific model of knowledge, one grounded in unity, continuity, and internal coherence. In the codex, meaning is contained within a structure whole. The object itself embodies a completed intellectual proposition. The codex system follows a bibliographic classification derived from Brunet, as Irini Solomonidou said us earlier, organizing knowledge according to disciplines and subjects. In Brunet's Manuel du libraire et de l'amateur des livres, books are organized into a classification system with 5 main classes: theology, law, science and arts, literature, and history. History is the widest, in the widest possible sense, including geography, travel, and cartography. This structure reflects the older humanistic mode of organizing knowledge, according to which geography was closely related to history, while space was regarded as the theater of human action. This humanistic conception was revitalized by the 19th century neo-humanism, and particularly by the work of Élisée Reclus, who encapsulated the epistemological trend or shift in the phrase, geography is the history of humanity in space, history is geography in time. Within such a framework, cartographic material is fully integrated into textual discourse. Maps appear in atlases, in travel literature, in historical works, in scientific treatises. They are preserved as part of a larger intellectual structure, and their meaning is shaped by that context. Their unity as object is maintained, but at the cost of autonomy. The map here is not an independent entity, it is subordinated to the logic of the book. On the other hand, the scrapbook collection operates according to a radically different principle. Sorry, this is the Brunet system. Not for today, for the book. On the other hand, the scrapbook collection operates according to a radically different principle. As Gennadius himself explains in his preliminary notice, 1892, this collection originated in the gathering of engravings, initially from illustrated newspapers, later expanded through systematic acquisitions in Vienna and London. Over time, this material was not simply accumulated, but actively reorganized, classified, and reassembled into approximately 120 scrapbooks, each carefully constructed. This work was largely carried out during periods of his unemployment and pursued with striking intensity. By his own testimony, not a single day passed without him working on his scrapbooks for between 4 and 12 hours, revealing the depth of his sustained, almost obsessive dedication. Unlike the codex, the scrapbook does not preserve unity. Unlike the codex, the scrapbook does not preserve unity. It produces it. It begins from fragments, images extracted from books, newspapers, prints detached from their original context, visual elements separated from the works to which they once belonged. These fragments are then recomposed according to new principles. Two such principles coexist within Gennadius' scrapbook system. The first is formal, classification by medium, technique, or visual type. This is visible in the heads of divisions, which begin with writing, printing, ornament, architecture, and the arts. The second is thematic or topographical, classification by subject matter, historical context, or geographical location. This second principle becomes particularly important in the topographical albums, in the topographical scrapbooks, where coherence is no longer derived from form, but from place. What is crucial, however, is that these two systems are not opposed in a simple sense. They are interdependent. The Codex, Brunet system, preserves the integrity of knowledge within stable structures. The scrapbook allows that knowledge to be broken apart into fragmentary visual information, redistributed and reassembled. The same material can circulate between the two regimes. A map, a plan, or a topographical view preserved within a book may later or otherwise be extracted, fragmented, and recontextualized within a scrapbook. Conversely, fragments may be reintegrated into new, meaningful entities, wholes, albums. This circulation produces a dual epistemology. Knowledge is no longer confined to a single mode of organization. It exists simultaneously as continuity and as discontinuity, as unity and as dispersion. The codex and the scrapbook do not simply store information, they generate different ways of knowing. In this sense, Gennadius' collecting practice can be understood as a deliberate response to the complexity or the utopia of his object, Hellenism itself, a historical reality that is continuous yet fragmented, territorially grounded yet diasporic, cannot be adequately represented through a single system. It requires instead a plural, flexible structure capable of accommodating both stability and transformation. Maps, topography, and the scrapbook system. Within the scrapbook collection, the role of maps becomes particularly complex, and it is here that the internal logic of the Gennadius system becomes more fully visible. The formal classification places cartographic materials within the geography section, as we saw before, divided between scientific elements and decorative components. The later category, cartouches, allegorical figures, heraldic devices, scales and trophies, even bindings. I think I have one. I don't have one, sorry. I thought that this is the previous one. Yeah, the one I sent you, yeah. The later category, the decorative components. This category is developed in a remarkable detail. At this level, the map appears to dissolve into its constituent parts. It is treated not as a coherent representation of space, but as a composite visual object whose elements can be isolated, compared, and regrouped. This fragmentation might initially suggest a loss of meaning, or evidently. However, such an interpretation would be incomplete, because alongside this formal logic, another organizational principle operates, one that is no less fundamental: topography. Half of the scrapbooks are topographic. The topographical scrapbooks introduce a different mode of coherence. These volumes are structured according space, place, regions of Greece, cities, landscapes, and sites of the Greek diaspora. Within this spatial logic, maps assume a crucial role. They frequently appear at the beginning of a scrapbook. Functioning as means for grounding the fragments, as points of entry, orientation, and visual remastering of the fragments that follow. A general map establishes the spatial framework. More detailed plans refine it. Refine it. Subsequent materials unfold within that framework. In this context, the map is no longer a fragment. It becomes a structuring device. This role is reinforced by the existence of dedicated map scrapbooks, 3 volumes composed exclusively of maps of Greece and others devoted to sacred geography. This function as the three initial scrapbooks containing solely maps function as cartographic thresholds underpinning the entire system. Maps thus operate at multiple layers, as formal, scientific representations, as visual fragments, as structuring devices, and as autonomous ensemble. The scrapbook system is therefore not simply fragmentary, it is dynamic, operating through continuous processes of decomposition and recomposition. Maps are not static objects, but active elements within this system. Conclusion. Mapping Hellenism. The Gennadius Library does not merely preserve maps. It redefines their very function by integrating them into a dual system that combines the coherence of the codex with the adaptability and the flexibility of the scrapbook. Ioannis Gennadius transforms cartography into an instrument of cultural reconstruction. Maps are not only conserved, but fragmented and recomposed, unlisted in a broader effort to document and interpret the Greek world. What emerges is neither a history of cartography of the Greek world, nor a conventional geography, but a form of cultural geography. Mapping becomes a method for ordering dispersed realities and forging coherence out of fragmentation. This is particularly important in the context of the central purpose of Gennadius' collection, that is, the recording and documentation of Hellenism, which is neither defined nor limited to a fixed geographical context, but rather as a historically multi-layered, geographically diffused, and constantly evolving ethnocultural reality. The result is a unique intellectual construct, a system that surveys not only space, but also a culture, Gennadius' own response to the fluid, multi-layer and diasporic nature of Hellenism, an ethnocultural reality that unfolds through successive diasporas across the Mediterranean, the Black Sea, and the universe at the end. I believe in closing that we can reiterate our initial observation with greater confidence. The extensive library Gennadius compiled constitutes indeed one of the most ambitious intellectual endeavors of modern Hellenism. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let us now turn to post-Byzantine manuscripts and their special significance in Gennadius' world. And our final speaker for the evening is Stavros Grimanis, who studied philosophy and social theology at the University of Athens. He holds an MA in Christian worship and Byzantine hagiography and a PhD in Byzantine hagiography. He conducted postdoctoral research at the Hellenic Institute of Byzantine and Post-Byzantine Studies in Venice. He has participated in numerous research projects on archival and literary manuscript sources, collaborating with institutions such as the Gennadius Library, the University of Athens, the Austrian Academy of Sciences, and the Research Center for the Humanities in Athens, among others. And since 2023, he has served as head of the Historical and Paleographical Archive of the National Bank of Greece Cultural Foundation. Stavros.
Thank you, Vera. First, I would like to express my gratitude to the conference organizers. I'm very glad and honored to be here in this splendid event. My talk, in my presentation, I will try to explore and present the content, some numbers, statistics, the methodology of Gennadius, referring to a specific group in the whole collection of manuscripts of the library. Allow me to start by quoting Gennadius. Some of these were catalogued at different times, but as I'm not sufficiently expert in paleography, I consider this catalogue as an effort far from accurate or satisfactory. Many of the following items are of great interest, and they should be more closely examined. The whole of this section should be thoroughly revised before printing. In its present condition, it can serve only as a general guide to the contents of this portion of the library. With this, Gennadius opens the catalogue he himself compiled in London in 1922 for his collection of manuscripts. I would like to focus on three main points. First, his intention to create a general guide to his collection. Second, his recognition that this was only a first attempt, certainly in need of revision. And third, his wish that the manuscripts be studied more carefully, as he considered many of them to be of particular interest. This introduction refers to the manuscript collection as a whole, which is not the direct subject of the today presentation. Nevertheless, it is worth noting that the catalogue he compiled does indeed constitute a valuable initial guide. Its structure will be discussed in more detail below. The revision he envisaged was later undertaken by the library in various phases of its history, notably through the unpublished handwritten catalogue by Panagiotopoulos and Kominis, as well as through two major projects aimed at updating and enhancing the library's electronic catalogue, in which Mrs. Vasiliki Iliakou collaborated and in which I also had the honor to participate at a later stage. On this basis, I undertook this presentation, and I would like to warmly thank the director Maria Georgopoulou and the senior librarian Irini Solomonidi for both the opportunity to work on the Gennadius Library manuscripts and the invitation to speak today. The third point remains especially significant, as the library continues to be a major reference center for the study of writing and manuscript culture. This is evidenced by the large number of the researchers associated with each manuscript, as well as by the importance of the scholarly work and findings produced. By way of example, I will mention two aspects. First, the numerous scribes and scripts identified or further documented through the Gennadius manuscripts collection in the repertories currently in use. And second, studies and editions devoted exclusively to these manuscripts, such as, for example, the work of Professor Olga Graziou on the iconography of Gennadius manuscript and the translation of Don Quixote in modern Greek from the manuscript 778 of Gennadius. For today's presentation, I have selected a specific group within the Gennadius collections, the Greek post-Byzantine manuscripts. The plural in the title reflects the fact that, in addition to the original Gennadius donation, which contains 67 items, there are further contributions containing relevant material. The most significant of these include the Kyriazis collection with 33 manuscripts, the Martakos collection with 21 manuscripts, the Volidis collection with 17 manuscripts, donations by Curtis Runnels, 12 manuscripts, and the Stathatos collections with 10 manuscripts, as well as more recent acquisitions. In forming this group, I applied both systematic and chronological criteria. First, the use of the Greek script and a predominant Greek context of production and reception. And second, a time frame spanning from the second half of the 15th century to the establishment of the modern Greek state. These, of course, are technical boundaries, which inevitably create transitional zones where the fluidity of such categories becomes apparent. As for chronology, the Byzantine manuscript tradition does not cease with the Ottoman conquest of Constantinople. Manuscript production, use, and reproduction continue well beyond this point, just as they persist throughout the 19th century, despite the rise of printing in Greece following the formation of Greek state. Nevertheless, the period from the late 15th to the early 19th century can be viewed as a coherent whole, shaped by three key factors. First, political, the loss of a central political authority. Second, cultural, the spread of printing. And third, the social, the mobility and changing needs of the communities engaged in these cultural practices. Based on these criteria, the earliest manuscript included is Chrysoloras Erotimata, manuscript 59, likely dating to the mid-15th century, while at the other end stands some musical manuscripts from the middle 19th century, which still follows earlier traditions. In terms of systematic criteria, I also included manuscripts written in Greek but produced by Western scribes or in Western context. For example, manuscript 13.1 or manuscript 10. The one part is the Greek text, the other is the Latin, written by a Western hand for a Western audience. Manuscript 45. It's a mixed codex. The first part is written by a Greek hand, the second part by a Western hand. The Gennadius 61, all written by a Western hand and focused on a Western audience again. And finally, a very interesting manuscript, the 31 manuscript, which contains many choirs, different choirs, bound together, and from different phases and from different provinces of hands. Western hand, Greek hand, Western hand, Greek hand again. As well as two Karamanlidika texts, Greek language works written in Ottoman script. The Chronography of the Pontes of 18th, 19th century, and a liturgical one, very beautiful liturgical one, the manuscript 33 of the 18th century. Finally, I included 3 letters by Dimitrios Ypsiladis and Adamadios Korais, written in French, but from Greeks in a Greek environment for Greek purpose. This with some reluctantly. An additional feature of this group is the inclusion of archival material, documents, letters, and registers classified as manuscripts, as they were originally collected and designated as such by Gennadius himself, as we will see below. Subsequently, similar material was incorporated into the same collection. One example is found in Volidis' manuscript 19 and 22, which contains fragments of documents and material from the Codex of the Metropolis of Kastoria from the 18th and 19th centuries. On the basis of this criteria, the group I have assembled for this presentation comprises a total of 198 manuscripts. Chronologically, we can first present the temporal distribution of the group in diagrammatic form, that is, the classification of the manuscripts by century. The table shows all items dating from the second half of the 15th to the early 19th century. These figures are, of course, closely related to the age and rarity of the material and cannot be attributed solely to selection criteria. But if we assume that age correlates with value, it is important to bear in mind that the original collection was formed by a private collector who, regardless of his financial means, inevitably faced certain limitations. The following table presents a distribution by century of the manuscripts that belonged to Gennadius himself, whether part of the original collection or later acquisitions. As the combined data demonstrate, the overall collection today follows a similar chronological pattern with regard to the group of post-Byzantine manuscripts. By genre, the founders' choices become perhaps even more apparent in the way the manuscripts are categorized according to their content. Based on a detailed examination of this group, I arrived at the category shown in the table. Out of the total of 198 items classified as post-Byzantine Greek manuscripts, those belonging to the original core of the collection, the Gennadios donation, 67 items, are distributed across these categories as shown in this chart. At first glance, manuscripts intended for liturgical use appear to predominate. However, if one groups them more broadly into 2 main categories, religious and non-religious, the picture becomes more balanced. Overall, the collection reflects a wide spectrum of textual uses. Liturgical life, central to the lived experience of Greek Orthodox communities during this period, naturally forms a major axis. Yet, the broader distribution reveals a more nuanced composition. Hagiographical texts are not only, we must not see them only as religious, are also texts that very, let's say, bestseller. They have the use of bestseller and romances sometimes. Moreover, if we consider that canon law manuscripts largely serve to regulate communal life, the scope widens further. Particularly noteworthy is Gennadius' apparent preference for musical manuscripts, mainly ecclesiastical music. Though the collection also includes a secular example and an ancient theoretical treatise. A second clear preference lies in educational material. 8 works in philology and grammar, along with 5 scholastical textbooks for which mathemataria, for which he even established a distinct category in his catalogue. When these are considered alongside manuscripts related to science, philosophy, geography, and classical texts, the cultural horizon of the collection expands significantly, reflecting a broader cultural and educational framework. A third category of interest, less prominent at first glance but evidently significant, is history. Here it is important to return to the subgroup of archival materials, which Gennadius included within the manuscript collection. Many of these were classified under the heading Modern Greece, alongside words as the Vocharias, a poem dedicated to the Greek hero of revolution Marcos Vocharis. It is important to examine how the library's continued acquisition policy and the enrichment of this collection, particularly within the group of manuscripts under discussion, maintain the rationale and intentions of its founder. I found the final table, which is this, particularly striking. It is the core collection of Gennadius, the collection without Gennadius, and the total collection. You can see that mainly the library follows the steps of its founder. Let's see now the work of Gennadius on manuscripts. It is therefore important to examine in greater detail Gennadius' work on the formation of his collection as a coherent whole, through the catalogue he compiled himself in 1922 in London. Gennadius establishes a series of categories under which he classifies his manuscripts. The first is theological, which includes the subcategories special Orthodox liturgies and treatises in Greek music, church music. Under the title Ancient Greek and Byzantine Literature, he groups together classical authors, Byzantine writers, and post-Byzantine figures such as Theophilos Korydalevs and Veniamin Lesbios. These classifications arguably reflects another dimension of his historical vision of Greek culture, shaped by the prevailing idea of continuity from antiquity to modern times. Within this category, he also includes the group of manuscripts mentioned earlier, written in Greek with Greek content, but either produced by Western hands or by Greeks in Western context. In the same category, he also includes a subgroup entitled Early 18th Century Greek Classbooks, referring to the so-called mathemataria, for which he shows a distinct and conscious interest. In the first of these, manuscript 50, he adds a detailed remarks concerning codicological features and the structure of this kind of manuscript. Also noteworthy is the form of the heading Greek grammarians. It is not Greek grammars, but Greek grammarians, under which he places Chrysoloras, Aristarchus, along with Aristarchus and George Georgios Chirovoskos. As he explicitly states at the beginning, his method consists in reproducing the title as it appears in the manuscript itself, or the opening lines when no title exists, or the colophon when available, which he almost always transcribes in full using a strict diplomatic method. He also provides a general indication of content, or in some cases, parts of it, not the table of contents. He notes the scribe of the manuscript when it is mentioned. Among technical features, he records material, dimensions, and binding. He also notes previous owners in exceptional cases, or aerial transfers, acquisitions, or annotations. In several cases, he records the places and the date of acquisition. He also supplements earlier entries with manuscripts acquired after his major donation. We can see here his hand and a glued paper on the catalogue. In some cases, he even adds bibliographical references relevant to the manuscript. He is particularly attentive to bindings, which he often describes in detail and classifies as monastic, Venetian, etc. Where the script itself is not visually distinctive, the binding often serves as a compensatory descriptive element. He uses tables with images of the bindings of his manuscripts And these are some cases of described of bindings. He consistently pays attention to aesthetic qualities of handwriting noting, fine bold hand, superb specimen of Greek calligraphy, fine cursive writing, but also notes, as we see before, rough, illegible hand, indicating that aesthetics of scripture alone were not a decisive criterion for selection. The history of the codex can also be a criterion, as in Manuscript 48, for example, dedicated to Friedrich Thies. Condition is likewise an important factor. Repeatedly described as in perfect condition or fresh condition, overall, Gennadius' catalog reveals a method that combines diplomatic transcription, codicological description, provenance tracking, and evaluative remarks, forming a systematic and remarkably modern approach to manuscript cataloging for a non-paleographer collector. Let's pass to the management of this collection. The management of this collection by Gennadius Library follows the principles established by Ioannis Gennadius and has evolved in continuity with the broader development of the library. The original core of the donation, as classified and described by Gennadius, constituted the foundation basis for its subsequent expansion, as we saw, which also includes the group of manuscripts outlined in broad terms in this presentation. From the outset, the collection was shaped in close alignment with the founder's vision while simultaneously responding to the contemporary demands of research. Later donations and acquisitions substantially enriched the corpus, providing greater completeness and thematic breadth, including within the specific sub-collection under discussion. A central priority has always been systematic organization, accurate documentation, and controlled access to the material. In line with these principles, cataloging and documentation have progressively evolved and are now implemented through an integrated electronic catalog where the majority of items are described according to modern international standards, ensuring consistency, standardization, and interoperability with global bibliographic systems. At the same time, administrative and curatorial oversight is combined with specialized conservation policies aimed at safeguarding both the intellectual and physical integrity of the manuscripts. A systematic conservation program was introduced in collaboration with specialists such as conservator Myrto de Livoria, for example, while the storage of the material in acid-free boxes and controlled environmental conditions within a specially designed space ensures its long-term preservation. Access and use constitute another key dimension of management. In addition to in-situ consultation within the library, structured forms of remote access were developed at an early stage, initially through microfilming and today through on-demand digitization services. Throughout all procedures, preservation priorities guide handling and consultation practices supported by strict environmental and storage protocols. Finally, the management strategy extends to the dissemination and scholarly activation of the collection. This is achieved through publications. 2 publications, for example, are dedicated to the manuscripts. Exploring Greek Manuscripts in the Gennadius Library, edited by Maria Politi and Eleni Papa, and the Travel in the World of Manuscripts catalog for an exhibition of Gennadius manuscripts in 2004. More, online publications, educational initiatives, curated exhibitions. The exhibition that now is in Makrigiannis wing contains 5 of these documents, of these manuscripts that we just tried to present, as well as through the institution's broader outward-facing activities. In this way, the collection is not only preserved, but also continuously integrated into active academic research. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Stavro, and thank you to all 4 speakers for helping us understand a little better Gennadius and his collection through content, patterns, and practices. I think we have time for questions, if there are any, and also for questions for the previous session.
Yes.
Christine.
Thank you all very much for these great papers. My question, it's Cristina Dondi, the Secretary of CERL. My question is for Stavros. And I've seen some of the early images of the manuscript written by a non-Greek hand, the name Sigismondo Malatesta. Is that an Italian provenance of the book? And if so, are there other Italian provenances from among these manuscripts?
Yes, there is a manuscript. Yes, we and the catalogers have identified Western manuscripts coming from Italy. For example, we have identified, it has been identified, the hand of Onorio da Maglio in a manuscript, I don't remember. I think it is the second Erotimata of Chrysoloras, the second copy that Gennadius has.
Thank you. I just want to comment on George Tullius's explanation of Gennadius's collecting mentality. It was very, very interesting. Thank you very much.
Right. Professor Kokona. Yes.
Δεν είναι τόσο ερώτηση όσο μια παρατήρηση που τη βρίσκω
that I would like to, a similarity that I find quite interesting with another case. Gennadius has an ancestor who has made a collection, has put together a collection with exactly the same goals. About a century earlier, a Greek tradesman in Vienna. What's interesting is that although they are 1 century apart, despite the fact that they're in different countries, they use the same tool in order to categorize their books per date. And I think this is interesting because this manual had particular prestige among people who were neither Francophone. I don't know whether Gennadius spoke French or not. He did. Okay, fine. But Apostolakis did not speak any French in Vienna, Austria. So despite all this distance and the different time they were apart, I see they're using the same tool. So this is remarkable and it's worth studying even further. Let me just say that the fact that Gennadius used Burnet was a surprise to me because I expected that he would have followed something different. I thought that he would have found something Anglo-American or something, but looking a little bit further, because we have all this taxonomy by Gennadius after 19-20 years, we thought, let's search it a little bit further. To me, it was a surprise, and perhaps I may have said that, yes, he does follow an American system, which is not valid, after all. That's it. Thank you. The great privilege, the great advantage of Brené is that it gives titles. The great help to collectors is that they have each time bibliography. There's those units or chapters. It says what it includes. It's global bibliography in the form of a guide towards collectors. This is the great advantage. Now, regarding fidelity, I'm only talking about the sector that I know. About the rest I have no idea, but what I can understand and tell you is that the conceptual connection between geography and history is fully adopted. But in his catalog, Geography and Travel is a completely different unit, whereas there is no history unit, only parts thereof. And this is very, very interesting as to what was going on in Gennadius's head at the time. What is strange, however, is that looking into the archives about what he says about taxonomy, in the beginning he says that geography belongs to history. Then he appears as if he has made a catalog, Geography and Traveling and maps together. And this is very, very interesting.
I think, and I hope Mariana is still here. Yes. So I wanted to ask two very different questions. One, because Mariana has written her dissertation on Gennadius, and she knows more, she knows the man. I don't know, you know the man. Well, it's a good thing your husband is not very jealous. But maybe to give us some more information. I mean, in your paper, you try to emphasize the bookish and library world. If you could tell us something more, maybe even thinking about the Stanford map, but something more specific about how he was using this material, and if you have any more insights that you didn't tell us in your paper. And then the second would be to Paolo, which, you know, is the one paper that internationalizes a little bit more this collector in London. I mean, both Paolo and Jerry sort of thought about how Gennadius managed to collect this material in London. And maybe tell us a little bit more about if there is, I assume there isn't, I mean, are there any collectors or the big booksellers, do they say anything about Gennadius? These are my questions.
Now I don't know which language to use. I'll switch to whatever. English, I'll keep it to English, okay. Well, there are many instances that Gennadius used part of the material he had collected for diplomatic reasons, if this is what you're asking me. Apart from the map, we also have the loans of independence. He had gathered lots of information which he used while he was discussing with the bankers how this issue would be solved. And he had also, on many instances, he knew where to pick up the information he had gathered and then use it, especially when writing articles, when speaking with the ministries, when speaking to the British politicians, and they trusted him. It's really interesting that Gladstone asked for information when he was writing an article in Greece, and not only him. Louis Sergeant, another very famous author in England, when he was writing New Greece, he used lots of information from Gennadius, which was piled up in the scrapbooks. And this is where I found this info that I'm sharing now. So, yes, indeed, and I think this was a basis. And in the long run, he went back and he tried to enrich these units of information he had gathered. So, that's from me. When he started it, yes, indeed. Passionate? Well, he must have been really convincing. Well, I don't know. The magic worked there. Because when he himself spoke to the ministry and he proposed what we have the correspondence, and he showed the catalog. He showed the catalog. It was already written, and it was there. So yes, indeed, they used it. But however, it's really interesting that Gennadius said that from the very time I was born, I felt that I had a responsibility. And I think this was the inner drive in collecting all the information he had.
And Leonora wants to say something.
When you spoke about his formation, you leave out this episode of the Dilisi murders and the pamphlet he writes and circulates.
Yes, I should have. Sorry. Yes, I should have mentioned that. Yes, he had collected so much information about bringage in the whole world, and so as to defend, of course, his case. And he had also collected lots of information on bringage in Greece, and his Dilisi murders pamphlet was really well documented. And therefore, it was even mentioned in the House of the Lords as a semi-official apology of Greece about the event. So that was another instance that he used the knowledge he had that far for the Greek cause, even before entering the diplomatic service. It was in him, I guess.
I think we have to remember that Gennadius, the son of George Gennadius, incredibly important during the revolution. We have to remember that Gennadius comes from this vrasmos, this regeneration of Greece. I think that may be one of the reasons that he was so determined to make this question of Hellenism so broad and so determined. I think we have to remember where he came from.
Sorry. Oh, now it's working. Sorry. Okay, right. There is a reason why I'm in humanities and not in IT. Right. So I'm sure that some booksellers and some auctioneers they must have written down something about Gennadius, but the problem there is that most of these interactions they happen in the same city and so verbally. So, but the two obvious places to look in would be in Sotheby's archive and in Quaritch archives, let's say, because they are the largest and they are the more organized. Many of the other small business they were run by a single person, so not everybody was as meticulous in storing things and information like Gennadius. So a lot of these private archives they are lost. But I guess that one particular event that can be investigated more is when Gennadius organized the sale with Sotheby's, and all the Sotheby's archives they are microfilmed and deposited in the British Library. So since enough time has passed and there's no copyright or problem of any sort, I'm sure that there must be some official documentation about this kind of Gennadius as a consignee. Yes, and the other possibility is that there are some traces in some of these booksellers. They wrote memoirs using usually blaming colleagues when they retired. And so they're more work of gossips than substantial work of scholarship, but sometimes but I haven't checked, honestly, in any of this. So more to come.
Great. Thank you for 4 great papers. Just a quick question to tie together maybe Jerry's opening comments about some of the bad behaviors or behaviors that are going out of fashion that we see, especially the washing of marginalia and the changing of bindings. With George's closing section on scrapbooks, because the third behavior is cutting, making fragments, not just buying them, but making fragments. And you didn't quite clarify, I'd like to hear more if you're able to say it, about the practice of creating fragments, but also the visual models for the arrangement of the material. Those are 2 areas that I think there's a lot of broader interest in. So I'd be curious what we know.
For the last part tomorrow, maybe, I don't know if it's you, but tomorrow there is the director of the Warburg Institute here. So you have the answer. So you have the answer. There is an obvious formal similarity with Warburg's collection, and there is the same utopian target that can't be attained through other means, only through perpetual recomposition. And formality too. When you see, if you saw Gennadius scrapbooks,
I haven't seen them.
The letters you have to see. He has a scrapbook on A, on B, on C. You understand? It's some thousands of examples of typographic. It's an obsession, I guess. But you saw in an image that we saw before. We saw all this paper, this half-destroyed paper. So I guess that there was a lot of cheap available material. I don't think that he was destroying books. Maybe he did. Maybe he did. But even today at a Bouquiniste, you can find spare pages or spare images. What they're selling is this, is isolated items, yeah. So the question, I think that the epistemological key issue is the flexibility of the scrap and the possibility of recomposing non-stop and surely when your target is very difficult to attain. I think that tomorrow you will speak about scrapbooks, and I hope so.
I'll add it.
I'll just add. I mean, if one thinks at the first edition of Nicholas Barker's development of, the Aldine Press, 1985 was the first edition, I can't recall. But anyway, it's, a book from less than 50 years ago, and it has, sheets of leaves, actually, or from Aldine Incunabula. Original ones. The second edition, which I have, sadly does not. But, which besides it creates a problem from a catalographic standpoint, because, from an Incunabula standpoint, technically there are like 500 copies of, Theocritus in single leaves all around the world. So we're not going to catalog them. But, incomplete books were around. I mean, clearly we didn't use new books. I mean, complete books. I think the point is, the perception of hospital copies that were used to complete other copies, and you just take a sheet out and you cut the letters, was still acceptable then, and I think to a sense would say it was still acceptable half a century ago. Today, hopefully, it's done. But
if I may add into this, it's not an apology, of course, but the whole practice of bringing together like printer devices and type and different A, B, C, and letters to compare is also sort of a bibliographical higher purpose. And indeed, it's a practice that was started already at the end of the 18th century, when when bibliographers, including Brunet and Renoir, they tried to put a name or a place on books and printed books that has no indication or bibliographical data. So it was their database. Let's put it this way, and it's not that uncommon to have that. So maybe the question is whether Gennadius collected only types that would help him to identify printed edition of Greek books that has no editorial indication and was more random. But it's also possible that he bought part of this material already catalog or collected in this way rather than paper cutting. Yeah.
Just to add a small detail, is very seldom there is commentaries or identifications on all this material. Whenever the information, the caption was close to the image, he cut it to and he pasted it. But for the rest, we don't know where it comes from. You have to be, you need 120 specialists to recognize whatever is in there. Yeah.
Sorry, but then I would add a point. Then what's the purpose of having, it's definitely not to identify editions if you're looking at letters that have no indication of where they come from. So some were created as a database to identify, but others were just collections of letters or like cuttings, I would assume. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks everybody for wonderful papers. Just one quick question to Professor Tolias. Was Gennadius a unique case in this cartographic collection, in this collection of maps, or in Greece, were there others trying to construct this, to create this a parallel, let's say, a similar map collection?
It's not a map collection. It's mapping. He's the cartographer in a sense. He's putting together all these elements in an effort to survey something which is unframeable. It's utopian and very, very interesting for this reason. No, we don't have other cases, other similar cases. We have not collectors, but internationally, there is map collectors in the 19th century, and huge ones. Santarem, it's an enormous name, an enormous map collection. At the end of the 18th century, and beginning of the 19th, you have huge map collections which are compiled by cartographers or geographers. Danville had 10,000 maps. For instance, an example. But for this to become, it's 19th century and colonialism, I think, that creates a nationalism and colonialism. You have the collection of Prince Kamal Yusuf on Africa. This is nationalism. And you have the great there is map collections, a lot of map collections in the 19th century is a very spread practice. We have map collections from the early 16th century, but it becomes a kind of vogue in the 19th when you have the first systematic catalogs and the people know what to collect. This is the change. In Greece, Gennadius, I think, Gennadius is a Greek or is a British collector. I mean, not. And he's buying a lot in France too. A lot. In cartography, the half of it comes from Paris. Yeah. And I saw in the scrapbooks letters from dealers from Austria, from Germany, proposing him things. They proposed him Kyriakos d'Ancona manuscript. He bought it. I don't think so. We have Kyriakos manuscript? No.
So let us thank our speakers one more time. Thank you, everyone. And thanks, everyone, for being here. And we reconvene tomorrow morning at 10.
Can we take a picture of the people who spoke tonight? So it would be good for you. Please, the speakers. Christina, come as well. I will forget you. Wait, sorry. Closer.